I've learned that power doesn't always walk into a room wearing a tailored suit. Sometimes it arrives quietly, carrying the weight of everything it built and waits to be underestimated. That night, I was content to be underestimated. The gala was held at the Halcyon Grand, a ballroom so gilded it looked allergic to humility. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks, and every guest seemed determined to prove they belonged beneath them. I wasn't in my usual boardroom armor, just a dark suit, no tie, a face no one recognized. I wanted to observe before I signed what would have been the largest partnership of my life, a $4 billion merger that could change entire markets. The host had insisted on calling it a casual networking dinner. There's nothing casual about an evening where every handshake feels like a silent negotiation. I arrived early, blending in among financiers, influencers, and the kind of inherited wealth that moves through rooms like perfume, noticed but never questioned. The staff moved briskly between tables, trays balanced on their palms like trophies. That's when I first saw her, the waitress who would later turn a dessert into a weapon. Her name, I'd learn later, was Lydia Westwood, heiress to the Westwood Estate hotels. But that evening, she wore a black apron and a name tag like everyone else. At first, I thought it was a strange kind of humility, the daughter of the host pretending to work the floor. Later, I understood it was performance, not humility. When our eyes met, she offered a tight smile that didn't quite touch her eyes. I nodded politely. She moved on. I took a seat near the corner, content to watch. I've always believed the loudest person in a room usually has the least to say, but power recognizes silence, and some people can't stand it. Lydia was one of them. The dinner began with a predictable rhythm of forced laughter and expensive wine. Every few minutes, someone would ask what I did for a living. I told them I worked in finance. Technically true, I just didn't mention I owned it. Lydia began circulating with a silver tray of desserts, glossy pastries, miniature cakes too beautiful to eat. She seemed to enjoy the attention, dipping her shoulder towards certain guests, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. When she reached my table, her smile thinned. "Would you care for something sweet?" she asked. Her tone was polite, but the way she looked at me, at my dark skin, at my plain suit, told another story. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice even. "Whatever you recommend." She tilted her head. "You look like a chocolate kind of man." The people around us laughed. That careful, uncertain laugh people give when they aren't sure if something is offensive but don't want to seem sensitive. I just smiled. "Chocolate's good," I said. She leaned forward, picking up a small cake from the tray, a delicate slice layered with gold leaf and cream. But instead of placing it neatly on my plate, she let it slide from the edge of the tray, straight into my lap. The laughter this time was louder. "Oh," she gasped, a performance too sharp to be genuine. "I'm so sorry, it must have slipped." I stood slowly. The chocolate had smeared across my suit. Around us, people whispered, amused. Lydia reached out with a napkin, pretending to dab at the stain, her touch lingering longer than necessary, her voice low enough only I could hear. These events can be intimidating. Some people don't quite fit the dress code of success. I met her gaze and said nothing. Silence has a weight, and I watched her start to feel it. "It's fine," I said finally, taking the napkin from her hand. "Accidents happen." Then I sat back down as if nothing had occurred. But something had. I could feel the room shift. Subtle but unmistakable. Whispers carried like wind through crystal. People love watching someone powerful fall, even if they don't yet know who's falling. 10 minutes later, she'd learned exactly who I was. The event's host took the stage, microphone in hand, to introduce the special guest, the man leading the merger discussions. My name echoed through the ballroom like a bell. Elijah chairs creaked. Conversations halted. Every face that had looked through me suddenly searched for me. Lydia froze mid-stride, the tray trembling in her hands. I stood, brushing the chocolate stain from my suit. "Excuse the mess," I said into the silence, my voice steady. Someone thought I needed a little flavor. The laughter that followed wasn't directed at me this time. The air in that ballroom changed the moment my name left the microphone. It was like a storm had rolled in and everyone suddenly remembered they'd left their windows open. A few heads turned slowly, mouths slightly open, trying to reconcile the man with cake on his suit with the one whose name now carried a valuation of $4 billion. Lydia was frozen near the dessert table, her smile finally gone. I walked toward the stage. Every step sounded louder than it should have. The host extended a hand, trying to recover the room's composure. I shook it lightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice too bright, "Mr. Carter has been leading talks for the upcoming global merger, a historic collaboration between Carter Global and the Westwood Group." At the word Westwood, I turned slightly toward the dessert table. Lydia's last name hung in the air like a confession. The Westwood Group, her family's empire. The irony was almost poetic. I took the microphone and let the silence breathe. I've learned that in moments like these, patience is more powerful than words. It makes people lean in, unsure if they should applaud or brace themselves. "I want to thank the Westwood family," I said finally, "for their hospitality this evening. And I especially appreciate the warm, personal attention I've received from their staff." The room tittered nervously. Lydia's knuckles whitened around the tray. I continued, "When we discuss partnerships worth billions, we often talk about numbers, assets, market shares, portfolios, but we rarely talk about values, how people treat others when they think no one important is watching." Every word landed like a quiet strike. My voice stayed calm, polite, almost detached, the way you speak when you have already decided the outcome. "In business," I said, "respect isn't a currency you can fake. Either you have it or you don't." I handed the microphone back and walked off the stage. My team, who had been watching discreetly from the back, immediately knew what that tone meant. Within minutes, a text went out to our legal department. The merger talks were suspended. 10 minutes. That's how long it took. By the time I reached the lobby, the whispers had turned into ripples of panic. Lydia's father, Charles Westwood, caught up to me near the exit. He was red-faced and sweating beneath his tuxedo. "Mr. Carter," he said, forcing a strained smile, "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." "My daughter," I raised a hand. "Your daughter just reminded me why I built my own company instead of inheriting one." He blinked, caught between pride and desperation. "This merger means wows, growth, a future for both of our firms. Surely we can move past $4 billion, I said quietly. "That's what you stood to gain tonight, and you let arrogance cost you that." He opened his mouth again, but I stepped closer. "The deal is off." Effective immediately, I walked out before he could respond. Outside, the night air was cool, steady, the kind of quiet that feels earned. My driver opened the car door, and as I slid in, I glanced back once through the glass doors. Lydia stood there, surrounded by murmuring guests, her father glaring at her like she'd set fire to the family name. It's strange, I didn't feel triumphant, just still. You see, revenge is rarely loud. The best kind happens when you don't even have to raise your voice. As the car pulled away, my assistant, Julia, turned from the passenger seat. "Should I inform the board you're terminating negotiations?" "Yes," I said, "and make sure the press hears it before breakfast." She nodded. "Understood." I leaned back, letting the city lights blur past. Somewhere behind me, the Westwoods were probably calculating how fast a rumor travels in a world built on reputation. The answer is faster than money. By the time I reached my penthouse, my phone was already buzzing. Messages from investors, journalists, competitors pretending to be concerned, but secretly thrilled. Everyone loves a scandal, as long as it isn't theirs. I didn't reply. I poured myself a drink and stood by the window. The stain from the cake had dried into my suit, dark against the gray fabric. I left it there, a quiet reminder. I thought about Lydia. People like her grow up mistaking privilege for character. They think kindness is optional, respect is negotiable, and dignity belongs only to those who can afford it. But tonight she learned something money can't teach. That power isn't about who's served, but how you serve others. 10 minutes. That's all it took to turn her insult into her inheritance's undoing. Still, as I stood there, I felt something deeper than satisfaction. Clarity. I'd spent years fighting for my seat at tables where I was never expected to belong. Tonight reminded me I didn't need their tables at all. I could build my own. And I had. Morning came with the kind of silence that follows a storm. My phone was already vibrating on the nightstand. Every news outlet in the city wanted a statement. Carter Global pulls out a $4 billion merger after gala incident. The headline spread faster than coffee could hit my desk. I didn't bother answering calls. The world would draw its own conclusions, and that suited me just fine. By noon, analysts were speculating about what had happened. Someone at the gala had filmed the moment the cake slipped from Lydia's tray. The clip hit social media, first with laughter, then with outrage once my name was attached. Within hours, the internet had given it a title, The Cake and the Consequence. I spent the day watching markets react. Westwood stock fell 8% by lunchtime. Investors demanded an explanation. Statements were issued, retracted, re-edited. Damage control had never looked so desperate. I hadn't planned revenge. I'd simply refused to hide. Yet watching the story unfold, I realized karma doesn't always wait for permission. It only waits for timing. That evening, my assistant buzzed. "Charles Westwood is online too. He's been calling since morning. Put him through," I said. His voice cracked before he finished the greeting. "Elijah, please. This is getting out of hand. The board's in panic. My daughter's being shredded online." "I didn't post the video, Charles." I know. But you could calm it. A statement, a clarification. Say it was an accident." I looked out the window. The city below glowed like circuitry, systems feeding on consequence. "Was it an accident?" I asked quietly. Silence. Then almost pleading, "She's young." Spoiled, yes, but not malicious. I let out a slow breath. Spoiled is a choice when you're old enough to serve others. What she did wasn't ignorance. It was habit. He didn't answer. There are no negotiations left when dignity becomes the currency. "I wish you luck, Charles," I said, and ended the call. 3 days later, a headline announced Lydia's indefinite leave from public duties. Rumor said the family had sent her to Europe, away from cameras, away from the noise. But the internet has a long memory. Every repost of that video was a mirror she couldn't escape. In private, people congratulated me. Competitors called it poetic justice. I didn't celebrate. I went back to work. What most people never understood is that humiliation, when you've lived through it before, doesn't wound the same way. I had spent my early career being mistaken for the driver, the janitor, the intern. I'd smiled through boardrooms where people praised my articulate English as if I'd borrowed it. Each slight had been a brick, and brick by brick, I built a fortress around silence. That night at the gala, Lydia hadn't created my pain. She'd simply reminded me how far I'd carried it. Weeks passed. The Westwood deal died quietly in the press, buried beneath newer scandals. But its echo followed them. Their expansion halted. Partners withdrew. My company, meanwhile, found another alliance, smaller, steadier, built with people who understood respect before profit. Sometimes losing $4 billion saves you something far more expensive: your peace. A month later, fate or irony placed us in the same room again. A charity summit in Geneva. I hadn't known she would be there until the organizer introduced her as a private donor, wishing to rebuild her reputation through philanthropy. She walked to the podium, paler, thinner, composed but visibly brittle. When her speech ended, she stepped down and noticed me in the front row. Our eyes met for the first time since the gala. No cameras this time, no laughter. Just two people and a silence full of memory. She approached slowly. "Mr. Carter," she said, voice low, "I wanted to apologize, in person this time. I was raised believing my name meant something. That night I learned it didn't mean what I thought." There was sincerity in her eyes, the kind that costs pride to produce. I nodded. "It takes strength to face the mirror after the world holds it up for you." She swallowed. "I ruined something my family had built for decades. My father hasn't spoken to me since. But if it's any comfort, I think I understand now what you were trying to teach me." I shook my head gently. "I wasn't trying to teach you. Life was." She hesitated, then extended her hand. I took it. The handshake lasted only a moment. but in it lived everything unspoken: regret, awareness, release. As she turned to leave, she said softly, "I hope one day people talk about me for something better than a cake." "I hope they talk about what you learned," I replied. That night, I sat by the hotel window overlooking Lake Geneva. The water was black glass under moonlight. I thought about how a single act, one careless moment of cruelty, can ripple through empires. I thought about my own past, the mentors who believed, the strangers who didn't, and the patience it took to build power without bitterness. People think karma is punishment. It isn't. It's education. It gives back exactly what we teach it. Before sleeping, I wrote a note to my communications team: issue no further comment on the Westwood matter. Let silence close the story, because the real victory was never public. It was internal, the calm that comes when you no longer need the world to see you win. A few months later, I heard that Lydia had started a small hospitality school, one that trained underprivileged youth for hotel careers. She funded it quietly, without the family name attached. When I saw the article, I smiled. The universe has an elegant sense of irony. Sometimes the lesson that humbles us also redeems us. I still have the suit from that night. The dry cleaner offered to remove the stain, but I refused. It hangs in my wardrobe, a small patch of chocolate forever darkening the fabric. Every so often I look at it and remember. Dignity doesn't shout, it simply stands. And when arrogance throws a cake, dignity doesn't dodge. It lets karma do the cleanup. To everyone listening to this story, if you ever find yourself underestimated, don't rush to prove your worth. Let your silence measure their ignorance. And if you ever hold a position of privilege, remember kindness is the cheapest form of power you'll ever own. Because one careless moment, one cruel laugh, can end what generations built. 10 minutes was all it took for her to learn that. 10 minutes for me to remember why I built everything from nothing. So hold your head high, treat people well, and let karma keep its own schedule. It's never late. If this story spoke to something deep inside you, if it reminded you that grace is louder than revenge, that silence can carry more power than words, then don't just scroll away. Take a moment. Hit that like button, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been humiliated and stayed calm. For everyone who's been doubted, overlooked, and still rose higher. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their worth, someone who's fighting battles quietly, who's learning that sometimes the best response isn't rage, it's results. And if you believe, like I do, that karma never misses, that it may take its time, but it always finds the address, then subscribe. Because I have more stories that prove it. Stories about dignity, redemption, and the quiet power of walking away with your head held high. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You just need to keep moving, keep building, and let the universe handle the balance sheet. So go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. And let's keep these stories alive for every soul who ever had to smile through their storm, without the family name attached. When I saw the article, I smiled. The universe has an elegant sense of irony. Sometimes the lesson that humbles us also redeems us. I still have the suit from that night. The dry cleaner offered to remove the stain, but I refused. It hangs in my wardrobe, a small patch of chocolate forever darkening the fabric. Every so often I look at it and remember. Dignity doesn't shout, it simply stands. And when arrogance throws a cake, dignity doesn't dodge. It lets karma do the cleanup. To everyone listening to this story, if you ever find yourself underestimated, don't rush to prove your worth. Let your silence measure their ignorance. And if you ever hold a position of privilege, remember kindness is the cheapest form of power you'll ever own. Because one careless moment, one cruel laugh, can end what generations built. 10 minutes was all it took for her to learn that. 10 minutes for me to remember why I built everything from nothing. So hold your head high, treat people well, and let karma keep its own schedule. It's never late. If this story spoke to something deep inside you, if it reminded you that grace is louder than revenge, that silence can carry more power than words, then don't just scroll away. Take a moment. Hit that like button, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been humiliated and stayed calm. For everyone who's been doubted, overlooked, and still rose higher. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their worth, someone who's fighting battles quietly, who's learning that sometimes the best response isn't rage, it's results. And if you believe, like I do, that karma never misses, that it may take its time, but it always finds the address, then subscribe. Because I have more stories that prove it. Stories about dignity, redemption, and the quiet power of walking away with your head held high. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You just need to keep moving, keep building, and let the universe handle the balance sheet. So go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. And let's keep these stories alive for every soul who ever had to smile through their storm.